Lay the moment of truth any further. It's time to bring in this week's guest. I have Mo Hamzian with me. He is the CEO of Vel. You may not know who they are right now. You're gonna, not only because you're listening to the episode, but because Vel is quickly taking over business markets across the United States. Vel is a premium work cafe, quickly expanding across a variety of business markets in the U.S. Mo is a long-term student of entrepreneurship in the truest sense and is now bringing the new environment for productivity to the coastal empire. Mo, welcome. You are now in Good Morning Market.
Wow, Philip, what an introduction. I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks very much. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Absolutely. I have a lot of coffee in my system, trying to keep it on brand for the episode. So you'll see fast talking. You'll probably have to tell me to pump the brakes because I actually genuinely am excited about talking with y'all. You'll have a lot of stuff coming up that we'd like to get into the episode about what y'all have going on specifically. But due to the nature of your business, I think it would be a cool opportunity to talk with you about what's happening. When I first saw you as a potential guest, I just immediately thought, okay, where people work, because that has been a journey for folks for the past couple of years ever since COVID happened. There's all kinds of changes to how people have had to work. And then now that we're on the other side of a lot of those restrictions, how people want to work, because it shook us and made us rethink how work is done, where it's done, and what's the best place to get our best out of us. So I want to get into the deep weeds on that, but I got to start off with something a little bit easier for you. I don't want to throw you my 100-mile-an-hour fastball off the get-go. When you think about your office environment, what's your favorite thing? I'm looking around at my desk as we speak. What's your favorite thing in Mo's office?
Well, that's a brilliant question because my office is actual virtual. Vel was born remote. We're born during the pandemic. So as a corporate, as a startup, as a philosophy, we are remote. Everyone we hire is pretty much remote. So we went and compensated for that. So my digital office is actually quite exciting. We have a software called TeamFlow, and TeamFlow is almost like, imagine an animation meets virtual reality meets metaverse, where everyone who works at Vel, immaterial of where they're in their location, or they may be in St. Louis or Las Vegas, logs into Vel's virtual world, and we connect over there in a kind of this animated environment. So I have my favorite chair there, believe it or not, in the metaverse, in this cartoon character. But today I'm at Vel. I'm in Vel Savannah, and I'm sitting in a pod, believe it or not, recording this podcast with you from a coffee shop. So I'm everywhere and at the same time nowhere in the cloud.
That's really cool. I did not know we were immediately going to go to Zuckerberg's metaverse. He's talking about all the time. But hey, that's the future for some people. It's now for other people. So that's really cool that you have such a virtually deployed team, but with virtual assets and to be able to connect with each other and basically create a virtual version of the physical office environment. That's really cool. But let's go to more so in the past before we go way off into the future. There's this thing called COVID that happened a couple of years ago. And at least, for some of us, it was, a month. For some of us, it was over a year. People couldn't go to the office. So, I mean, I used to work in technology, by the way. I used to work in business-to-business technology. So I had already seen where some of this was developing around, some of the bigger corporate businesses had already started to create hybrid environments or virtual work environments, and, Zoom and Slack and Teams and all that stuff was already normal to me. But for most Americans, going to work meant actually getting in your car, driving to the office, right? And then COVID happened, and it really forced businesses and employees to rethink what they needed to be able to do and what they wanted to do. So you had, at least within the laptop class, I call them, obviously people who work in a factory, that's a different story. But for the laptop class, that shook everything up, and it made us rethink, do I really need to be in the office the entire time, 5 days a week, 9 to 6? Or could I do something different? And I think employers found also some opportunities there as well. There's always a normalization, though, on the other direction, because I know that some people are now saying, like, well, everybody's going to work remote. No one's going to go to the office anymore. At least the people who aren't backwards, they're just going to go, everybody go fully remote. What do you think is more of a short-term trend that will die off? And what do you think is going to be more of a long-term trend when it comes to all of this COVID based changing to the way that people go to work?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you mentioned both the short term and the long term. But before diving into that, I was doing some mental arithmetic of you're talking, the word commute came up, and I know the average commute is 25 way each way.
Yep.
And so if you're traveling 50 minutes a day as an average American commuting, that's 12,000 minutes a year that you're no longer spending on the commute. So it is extremely efficient not to have to commute. Having said that, is it stable, and can you overcompensate for the lack of infrastructure, for that dispersed, flexible experience? There are some overcompensations that you have to make, for instance, culture, momentum, etc. We'll talk about that. But I think the writing was on the wall even before COVID, where the direction of travel, certainly in the freelance market, in the freelance gig economy, that Upwork culture, that has been growing year on year. And even in like the 2018, 2019 Elderman reports produced by Upwork, we're talking about 45, 50 million Americans earning the majority of their income from freelancing. So, and that is, that's almost like a third of the US workforce population. So we're not even looking for the remote statistic. We know that direction was going. I think what COVID did, in a very legitimate way, it came and said, there's a wholesale shift in mindset, which means we no longer have to necessarily work and commute, which is now kind of, and I love the way you said, we not only are we working differently, but we're looking at work differently. And I joke around to people around me and my friends and say, what happens if you wake up tomorrow morning and you have eyes in the back of your head? What happens to hat design? What happens to pillow design? What happens to how you walk and how you eat and all these things that, it's an extreme example. But if you're now able to work categorically by not having to commute, if Zoom is becoming much more legitimate, maybe in fundraise or us having a podcast, and I challenge it even further, if I am able to come into a coffee shop and be able to do a podcast with perfect acoustic value and total privacy, in a total snackable, in a public environment, I'm able to have that level of privacy, then what could that mean for the worker? So I would say in the short term, the dust needs to settle a little bit until we realize what that means, maybe for banks, hospitals, insurance companies, hotels, logistics. So some major employers that cannot be remote and they need to be hybrid. But I think what we've realized as a consumer base of the workplace is that we need flexibility. We have to have flexibility. One size shoe does not fit all. And I want different things at the time. But I think we've been a sophisticated consumer of many different products, whether it's travel or car buying or home buying. We've been very sophisticated. We have lots of flexibility. We're now the consumer of the workplace, even though we have a contract between me and the workplace, me and the employer. I'm still a consumer of my employer. I'm still a consumer of my workplace. So I think there's some, and technology is changing too. So there's some social shifts that are happening. But short term, we see it's really exciting, and long term, it's just a little bit of unknown. Let's see how the dust settles.
Yeah, and I'm right there with you. And like, I agree. I think that what COVID did is it forced us to look at our paradigm. We had this certain paradigm about what does work look like, how does work work, and we were forced to look at our paradigm and go back to the drawing board in many ways. But at the same time, I think in my personal prediction, you're happy to correct me or challenge me on this, is I almost liken it to some of the technology hype that happened when iPads came out and when iPads and iPhones first got introduced into the corporate work environment. This is 10 years or so at this point. I remember being an intern at IBM, and so a lot of the tech guys were talking about that. Like, some people are saying there's no more desktop. You will see the desktop die. People aren't going to use desktops. Everything's going to be iOS, and even the Blackberries will go the way of the dodo, and you'll have just iPhones and iPads, and no one will use an actual sit-down computer. Of course, that was overly hype. It was more of a balancing act. Of course, BlackBerry did go the way of the dodo. But anyways, what I'm saying is it became a hybrid model where sometimes if you know that you're going to be in one place needing to do computer work for a long time, as great as iPhones are and iPads are, they're not as good as an actual desktop computer or a laptop. but at the same time, it became this hybrid model where we envelop those mobile technologies and be able to empower them to do more corporate type stuff. I feel like in the same vein that the great resignation was a reflection of the great transition. Like you said, the dust is still settling. If you look at how many people are switching jobs and the workforce settling in. But I mean, I think that it's going to end up being to where small business and big business alike, you're probably not going to have a lot of 100% purely remote only workforces. You'll have maybe one or two of those folks who are remote only because that was a concession that your average business made. But I think a lot of it will be that more of your meetings go remote only rather than in-person meetings. And that you'll probably have some hybrid concessions where people will come to the office on certain frequencies and at other times, or for special circumstances, they can be remote. I don't know. I feel like that 2 years from now, that's probably where we'll be, but I don't know if you think any differently.
Yeah, I like the example. I might go a little bit further and say it could always be, in some industries, it could be the Kindle to the book.
Okay.
And if you are earning your money from your laptop, if you are a graphic designer, a coder, a mathematician, even managing social media, and you're able to do that work without being in the office, I think there is a strong argument that says give the worker that flexibility. Also, what could it mean for hiring and recruitment if small businesses were able to accept hiring from Colorado versus from Georgia or Florida or somewhere close? So I think to some extent that social contract is changing, but I do love that you call it the great transition, because it is. We are transitioning to a new kind of white space and a new canvas, and collectively all of us are asking similar questions, which is, and it could be workplace 4.0, whereby if workplace 1.0 was the industrial revolution, we're now kind of 180, 200 years later experiencing a completely new dynamic.
No, that's very intriguing. So speaking to that trend, you mentioned the change to being able to go borderless almost when it comes to recruitment because of the possibility for certain jobs and certain companies and certain industries to go remote only. It's opening up new doors for not only recruitment, but also where workforce placement is, where these people are hanging their hats at night after the 9 to 6 or whatever it may be. And what we saw in the census data, the 10 years, the 20 teens, was urbanization. We did see a trend of urbanization as people moving more and more to big cities. That was a trend of the 20 teens. However, post-COVID, I think that went the opposite direction. And I think that we have been seeing, and we will continue to see, de-urbanization for a multitude of reasons. Some of it's politics, some of it's economics, some of it's simply the fact that, you know, real estate's really expensive and it's going to continue to become increasingly hard to get your first home. And in those urban centers where the property taxes and the real estate's hard to get, as we have more broadband development, we have more rather fiber development, it's more opportunity for people who work from their laptop to be able to live in smaller suburban markets. And we're seeing that where people are leaving places like California and New York, the Midwest, and they're going southeast more towards our part of the country, Texas, and also the far west. When it comes to a business leader listening to this and they're thinking of in terms of, okay, more talent's coming my way. Also, I can have all this virtual stuff that's now in my pocket. What opportunities and challenges do you think it presents for these business owners when it comes to recruiting that talent?
I think migration in itself is a recruitment challenge. But answering your question first, there's definitely a growth of the Zoom town for sure, however you define that Zoom town. So people have realized very, very quickly that priorities have shifted, right? They've because of the proliferation of the internet now, Upwork and Fiverr and a few other places, it's much easier to actually win employment, win jobs. Coupled with the fact, again, I'm just fortifying some of your arguments, coupled with the fact that it is now standard and legitimate for an employer to say, I will hire out of state, I'll hire out of town, and I'll follow the same recruitment process. It means people can really move home and move towns. And that's why cities like Savannah, 30, 40 new people are moving to Savannah every day. Charlotte is, Charleston is twice that. Charlotte is twice that. Nashville is twice that. So I'm not sure if it's de-urbanization, but I just think it's selection of different urban areas.
Right, you're right. I mean, like Nashville and Atlanta and Miami, those markets are big markets, and they're not having a problem with population loss. So it is and it isn't deurbanization. You're right.
So I think we have been given a strong choice as an employee to move around. It's up to the employer to say, I think, how am I going to build a culture around that? And it's much harder to do that when you have a legacy or you're an incumbent. When you're a giant and you're already employing like 30, 40,000 people, or even if you're employing 300-400 people, it's difficult to break from legacy because you have certain standards that have made you very, very successful. You have management that are incumbents and they have certain philosophies around it. So it's tough to come and say, let's scrap our previous culture and build infrastructure of technology, build infrastructure of ideologies and philosophies that says, let's capture that dispersed flexible worker. So however, I think, but for small businesses or startups, that the really is a blank canvas. And that's why we're so successful at doing that, because we don't have that legacy, and we can build a culture around remote and really celebrate that, and overcompensate for it with kind of being a digital native. But there are some voids and gaps that are going to happen because people are migrating and they're getting choice. So it's as an employer, it's to also realize that you are a seller of your employment. It's really, you're not just selling the work or the content of the work and paying a wage for it, but you're actually selling workplace experience. And what does that mean? If you're selling workplace experience, you have a certain responsibility that you may not have had previously.
And it's funny, like there's a whole new level of consideration when it comes to HR and cultural setting. Because, it used to be like, benefits, salary, and vacation days. Now we have a whole new level of consideration: workplace environment, culture, company culture, additional perks. People don't talk about vacations anymore. They talk about sabbaticals, and then hybrid, remote versus in-office demands. You're basically selling work-life balance. So there's a whole new level that we're having. This is a frontier for most of us. Some of us have been doing this for a while, but this has been thrust upon most of the people listening to this in your average everyday businesses. So as inevitably, more jobs are going to go long-term remote, or at least some form of hybrid. What do you think is the number one plus to this? Maybe from the seat of business owners, what's the number one plus to that paradigm change? And what's the number one challenge to that paradigm change?
I think selection, supply, and demand is an obvious plus. If you can now, again, legitimately, appropriately be able to hire out of state. We put out jobs on LinkedIn, and I kid you not, we get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of qualified candidates gunning for that spot. And we're not paying 2x market, we're paying fair value. We're not our benefits are in line with a startup, so there are much better benefits out there with a Series B startup than with ours, for instance. But I think we're offering flexibility. We're obviously offering excellent content. So what I'm trying to say is, as a business owner, if you're able to tap into that pool successfully because you are designed that way and you've geared up your business and management that way, then you suddenly have a much wider talent pool that you can select from. And that diversity, we've just hired someone from Vegas, for instance, right? And what does that mean for us? It means that now we have a West Coast mindset. We have another person who's on the team who's going to bring a completely different perspective than maybe the team that's maybe central US or eastern US. So I think also that kind of geodiversity of thought is really powerful for a team. I think the downside of it is building that camaraderie, being able to build that unified vision, that kind of corporate patriotism that may have existed quite natively if everyone commuted to a certain office and were together in the flesh. But I definitely think it's possible because we are doing it. My team and I are extremely well connected, even if we don't meet on a daily basis, because we are, as generations go, Generation Z and millennials are entirely digital native. They're completely comfortable connecting over an SMS, social media, And why can't that be incorporated and embedded in the workplace? Because it's quite meaningful. So I think connections are being redefined, and if we can, as business owners, keep up with that, then I think our businesses will thrive.
Yeah, to throw a little joke and a little shade at my own generation, if anything, the millennials and Gen Zs are more socially stunted in physical environments than we are in virtual environments. We don't feel disconnected when we're on a computer. We feel disconnected when we don't have that computer to lean on as a crutch. So yeah, I mean, but you're right. I think it can be navigated. So a final question before we take a slight pivot is, small business owners listening to this and they get to talk to Mo, and like you said, you've been working with business owners for a long time. You've started businesses. You're a student of entrepreneurship in its truest sense. If they're thinking about long term, how do I set myself up for success, and they're trying to figure out whether or not, and then how that they offer hybrid and remote work positions as a long term strategy, what's your main advice on how they should go through that process of figuring out their workforce?
Well, I think sometimes it's easier to be able to just fill for that role immaterial of whether they're remote or not. So I would say going into the job market with an agnostic view, employment market with an agnostic view, saying we need to fill these roles, and some of them may be local, some of them may be remote. I think that's a healthy way to do it. It could be that it is a fixed cost saving if you're remote. I mean, for Vel, it is. It is and it isn't. We've said we're not going to invest in real estate infrastructure for our corporate employees. Obviously, we are retail experience, so we have retail fixed cost. But we're going to divert some of that money, in fact, all of that money, into a digital kind of infrastructure. And whether we offer a stipend, whoever comes on board, we offer $1,000 stipend to any employee that joins us at Vel. So they can build their own infrastructure at home if necessary. So there's a little bit of give and take as a small business owner, but I would say for a very long time, small businesses weren't investing in people. They invested in product, competitiveness, margins, market share. I would say today, to be competitive on the sales side or customer acquisition side, or even competitively in business, you really have to invest in people. And so whether it's local or remote or hybrid.
So I want to take a transition to the other side of that coin. So now let's talk about the remote worker. We've been talking from the seat of the business owner. Now let's talk about that employee, that talent. So on the flip side, what is your remote advice to a talented person who is a remote worker on how they can maximize their productivity and their energy in that remote work environment? Because, I can speak for myself. In my previous job before I went out on my own, I was a hybrid employee, and I fought for the ability to work remote from time to time. And it's a blessing and a curse. It really is. And we've all experienced that from working remote, whether we wanted to or we had to. So Mo's talking to the remote worker right now. What is your advice to them on how they can really guard and maximize that energy and productivity?
It's amazing. I love that question for a variety of reasons. There's some skills or some vocations human beings just take for granted. You never say, I am just able to pick up a tennis racket and play really good tennis. You just don't do that, right? But there are certain things that we think, decision making. We naturally think we're humans, we have a computer, we have a processor, therefore we make decisions, we're good decision making. Those are one of those kind of like, or ability to manage money, for instance, and there's certain things that some people do really, really well and others don't, and education system has a role to play in it, or lack of it, etc. And we could talk about that for sure at a great length. But for some reason, we think if we have a laptop and a desk and a chair, somehow that's good quality workplace. We've never examined that. We've never invested in it. And it is honest. We were talking about this before the show. It is like running the 100 meters or the 200 meters or the 400 meters or whatever distance in flip-flops. And you're just not going to get there as effectively, as well. You're going to have injuries. You're going to get tired. So because you're remote, there's a major reliance on your home office,
Mhm.
because you obviously decided not to commute to work. Your office is either too far or you're
Mhm.
completely remote, which means several things. One, your home office is categorically probably not good enough
Mhm.
because you haven't invested 10, 15, 30, 100, $200,000 in it,
Mhm.
for it to be the best of the best of the best. And maybe if you work at a major employer, they have been spending that level on a unit economic point of view in their real estate to make it really good.
Yeah.
Number two, I think the monotony of home and
Mhm.
the familiarity of home,
Mhm.
and sociologically speaking, home is a place of comfort and relaxation and a
Yeah.
safe and safety, which is hugely viable. At
Mhm.
some point, that's not good enough. The
Yeah.
dog may get in the way, the kids may get in the way.
Mhm.
How do you guarantee privacy? Kids come from homeschool. It's endless, right?
Right.
So coupled with the fact that infrastructure may not be good enough,
Yep.
and the monotony of home means you can't optimize for work all the time. It's not the only place, and you don't have an office. Well, as the English say, you're snookered, which
Mhm.
means there's very little else for you to go because the library no longer is around. You can't go to the church. You can't
Mhm.
work out of your car. The
Mhm.
park, well, sometimes it's okay, but not really. Not if you want to have a Zoom call or work it up. So where do
Right.
people go? Well, millions and millions of Americans have been going to coffee shops, spending trillions of dollars in coffee shops.
Right.
So what I'm trying to say is not to say that that third place is not viable. It definitely is. Not that your
Right.
home is not viable. Your
Right.
home definitely is viable. You have to start injecting a level of flexibility and
Yeah.
routine
Yep.
in your life, and
Yep.
building what that workplace created for you at home. Um,
Yep.
and that's why I think that's why it's a really good segue for me to plug Vel,
Mhm.
as it turns out, is because that's why we exist. We've
Mhm.
said to ourselves, we don't want to disrupt the home. We don't want to replace your home. We don't want to replace your local coffee shop or even your Starbucks. We don't want to replace the office. We want to be that complementary product that says for about 4 to 8 hours a week that you want to do some extreme good quality work, that's where you go because you can reserve a table, you can reserve privacy, you still a coffee shop, etc. So being a extreme viable third place is
Mhm.
really valid today.
Mhm.
So I guess routine, build habits, build a habitat at home, and make sure that you become very good at keeping yourself motivated and
Yeah.
creative is flowing. Because being lonely in this kind of remote setting is
Mhm.
um is real. And just to flip it on the other side, at Vel, we
Mhm.
ask ourselves the question: how many billion-dollar businesses, $10 billion businesses, were created with origins of remote? Um,
Mhm. Yep.
Few and far between. In actual
Literally
fact,
the
maybe
garage building, the garage business, right? Yeah.
exactly. I mean, look at all the greats from Facebook to Microsoft to Google. These guys lived together like comrades for several years, fraternal brothers and sisters, building product. So remote has its reservation on to create scale, um, but the remote worker is definitely has it really good right now.
Yeah. No, a quick thought stream before we go back to like there's a position in the market, so to speak, that Vel is going to fill for this transitioning workforce. Is I feel like there's an outside and there's an inside element to it. When it comes to outside, you like because I was listening to a biblical studies podcast on the way back to my office. Is there's a term called holiness, but what holy means in a real basic sense is just set apart. And too many of us, like you said, we just assume because we're a person and we have a computer and we have a place on to which the rest of the computer, therefore office. No, not necessarily. So for the same reason, you technically could eat cake in the bathroom. You don't eat cake in the bathroom because there are certain places that just aren't conducive to certain activities. For the same reason, if you're going to do the home setup, you can't just drop the computer on a place in the house, and therefore you can maximize your productivity. So there's the outside standpoint when it comes to technology enablement, being able to close yourself off when you need to, but also to be able to be opened up and accessible when you need to, sources of distractions, while also having outside good positive forces of energy. And then there's also the inside standpoint, because we each have different things that work better for us or against us. And so we have to think about what psychologically, what state do we most thrive in, right? For some of us, we love working in sweatpants. For others of us, when we wear sweatpants to the desk, we actually act like we're wearing sweatpants, which means we just get lazy and lethargic. Some of us, like, even if we're at the house by ourselves, me included, I tend to dress up because, like, I just need that psychological, like, I'm getting ready to go to work, therefore I need to dress like I'm going to work. So that's some of that thought consideration there. And it seems like what Vel is doing, what y'all are bringing to the table during this paradigm shift, is people who are working remote, be it part of the time or all the time, as they're figuring it out and as their schedule demands, they need a holy place where that can be set aside and tailor-made for maximum productivity, but at the same time, being able to work with their schedule and their limitations and desires when it comes to geolocation. Is that, am I tracking here so far?
You're 100%. I love your arrangement of language, Philip. I love how your brain thinks, actually. So I replaced the word holy with sacred, and having those sacred moments whereby, and flow, it requires holy, requires sacred, for you to be able actually to be in an optimized stream. We call that Vel stream, as it happens. You need to really have that moment of psychological safety, the moment of not being overly stimulated, not under stimulation either. So what we said at Vel, we want to invest in behavioral sciences. We want to invest in hardware and software. And our entire manifesto internally is for you to achieve twice as much in half the time. How do you do that for it not to be a slogan? Well, as it happens, I am in a $30,000 pod produced by a manufacturer called Framery. They're the best of the best. And in that pod, I can hold a podcast in a public setting, in a coffee shop, and customers are going in and buying coffee without any interruption whatsoever. And I've been able to do that had I been a customer, and actually I am a customer of Vel, with an app. I booked it ahead of time. It's cost me, a few dollars. It's cost me $5 to get the pod and a coffee and a pastry. I've spent $10, and I've been able to do this exercise outside of my home. And then you go a little bit one step further and say, well, if we want to do that, how do we make sure that it's the right lighting for you? What does lighting mean? So we went to radiology rooms and hospitals and libraries, and the latest and greatest found out what creates creativity. How do we create psychological safety and comfort for you to be able to have the right lighting, to be able to not get too tired, but not be overly stimulated? We went even one step further. We said, what does the scent profile of the space have to be to give you that right level of inspiration? What does temperature have to be? Believe it or not, colder temperatures lend themselves better to analytics. Warmer temperatures lend themselves better to creativity. So we started playing around with that. And then privacy and acoustics. What are those? And what's amazing about it is that we have been able to do this in a coffee shop setting. And you don't go into a coffee shop and say, today I'm going to spend $50. You just don't do that. You go into a coffee shop and say, I want to spend maybe between $7 and $14 maximum. That's, I might buy a cap and it's going to push me over the edge, but that's not big. So if we can create that holy experience in a totally democratized way, and by democratized way, I mean both Philip and Mo can have the same experience, whether it's in Savannah or Charlotte, and neither of us are working for Google, this elitist environment. We're actually getting that experience in a completely snackable, frictionless way, locally to me, then we think that's a major win.
So I want to point out something to the audience to show the level of detail and appreciation for what Mo and his team are doing here by actually doing the research and actually trying to craft the optimal productivity environment. He talked about how what we're going through right now, Mo did, about maybe the next generation, the fourth iteration of business, going all the way back to version 1 would be the Industrial Revolution. Well, to that point, what you're talking about right now, back during the Industrial Revolution in the beginning of the 20th century, there was this guy named Galbraith who was a famous efficiency expert, and big corporations when they were rolling out the mega office or the big factory plant where you'd have hundreds of people coming to work, they brought in Galbraith. I forget his first name, but it was Mr. Galbraith. He was an efficiency expert, and they would go from everything to the amount of lighting to all these different little systems where he would find little efficiencies to help maximize productivity. That's exactly what it sounds like Vel is doing. And so it's not just, oh, look, there's a cutesy little cafe where you can get some internet and grab a coffee while you hold some meetings. No, like it sounds like you're actually going to the science to serve your customers and maximize their productivity. And to that point, you're rapidly expanding. You've got 3 other locations on the docket. You've got a grand opening coming up in Savannah at the time of this recording. So how can people learn more about Vel, connect with Vel, and then find out about your grand opening?
Well, thanks very much. We're actually opening on the 15th of September. We're massively excited about that ribbon cutting. We're open now. You can come in, reserve a place, experience Vel, but our ribbon cutting is in September. We're located in Bull Street in a building called the Matadora, an excellent development. We love the landlord. We are at 1508 Bull Street. You can go to myvel.com. That's where you'll find us. A funny story about that. We tried to buy vel.com, but the sellers wanted $750,000 for it. So we politely decided to pass, but we giggled and said, at least no one else is going to buy that. So go to myvel.com and you'll find everything about us. But come and see us in Savannah. Experience the space. It really is a bit of a museum the first time you see it. There's lots of details. There's even a phone toaster, a phone soap. You can come and just clean your phone, make sure it has no germs on it. We love seeing you.
No, that's lovely. September 15th, you said, for the grand opening.
That's right.
Okay, very good. So, folks, that's myvel.com, myvel.com. I want to come by, and I will be coming by. I'll actually be out of country on the 15th, but I'll come by before then because, hey, guys, for those of y'all who are in earshot of the Savannah area, they're open now. Mo, thank you so much for your time and for your insight. Congratulations on your rapidly expanding business. And I always love to speak to guys who are really taking the details and taking that to heart. So I'm really impressed with everything I'm hearing and glad we were able to have you on Good Morning Market today.
Thanks so much, Philip. God bless.